What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so this is a requested video for one of my subscribers. He likes me to do these head coaching comparisons, and they are very fun to do. And he wanted me to do a comparison between Rick Adelman and Mike D'Antoni. Now, let me say this. This is just an opinion. This isn't based in any type of fact. Obviously, it's just an opinion. So we shouldn't take this that seriously. And I love to see people's different opinions. I don't get mad at people disagreeing with me. The only thing that irritates me is when people are overly rude because they disagree with something someone says in this context. Like, it's not that important, you know. But anyway, speaking of Rick Adelman, and I'm just sticking with his coaching career. In 1977, he started coaching at Chimiquetta, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Chimiquetta Community College, which is a public community college in Salem, Oregon. And he coached there for 6 years. Then from 1983 to 1989, he coached with the Portland Trailblazers as an assistant. And it was in 1989 that he took over as the head coach of that franchise. And that's where he had the most sustained success of his NBA career. Then from 1995 to 1997, he was the coach of the Golden State Warriors. From 1999 to 2006, the coach of the Sacramento Kings, where he also had a lot of success, obviously. That was during the Vlade Divac, Chris Webber, Peja Stojakovic, Bobby Jackson era, Mike Bibby era. Earlier on, they had Jason Williams as the point guard. 2007 to 2011, he was the coach of the Houston Rockets. I think that's after Van Gundy left. And his last coaching stint was 3 years with the Minnesota Timberwolves. That was the Kevin Love years. Now as a head coach. 3 times he was the NBA All-Star Game head coach. And he won the Chuck Daly Lifetime Achievement Award just last year, back in 2023. His overall coaching record, 1,042 and 749. That's a 582 win percentage. Although in the playoffs, his record is just 79 and 78, just above 500, 503 winning percentage. Now, when it comes to Mike D'Antoni, he coached overseas after his retirement as a basketball player for 7 years. We had a lot of success, but we're talking about the NBA. We're not talking about overseas in this scenario. Then he was an assistant, coached the Nuggets for a year, 97, 98. And I think he briefly coached the Nuggets in 99. That might have been, I'm trying to remember correctly, I might be off with this, but that might have been when Dan Essel got in trouble, but I thought that was in 2000 when Dan Essel got in trouble. So I have to look at that. Then he was a Blazers assistant from 2000 to 2001. Then he coached overseas for a season. And then he became an assistant with the Suns back in 2002. And then in 2003, he took over as the coach of the Phoenix Suns. That's where all of us remember him as, the coach of that team for about 5 seasons. Then he coached the Knicks for 4 years. And then the Lakers for 3 years. Kobe was not a fan of his. He was an associate head coach with the Sixers in 2015-16. Then he was the coach of the Rockets. And then in 2020-21, he was an assistant with then with the Brooklyn Nets. Now, when it comes to accolades, Rick Adelman is not as decorated. He's not as decorated as Mike D'Antoni. Mike D'Antoni twice was NBA Coach of the Year. Rick Adelman never was. Twice, D'Antoni was All-Star Game head coach. Rick Adelman was 3 times. But also, Mike D'Antoni won Olympic gold as an assistant coach in Beijing in 2008 and in 2012 in London. And he won a FIBA Americas Championship as an assistant coach in 2007 in Vegas. And he won the bronze in 2006 in Japan. So he's more decorated than Rick Adelman. But does that make him a better coach than Rick Adelman? Well, it's kind of hard to say, man. Kind of hard to say. Rick Adelman missed the playoffs 7 times in his coaching career. But virtually all of those missed playoff appearances came when he was coaching teams that were rather bereft of talent, whether you're talking about the Timberwolves or the Warriors in the 90s, after Run TMC. Rick Adelman missed the playoffs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different times. But yet, I would say Adelman had the benefit of coaching more talented teams throughout his coaching career. The Phoenix Suns. And then when he coached the Knicks, they weren't a great team, but they were better than they were, say, in the mid-2000 teens. Then he coached the Lakers post-championship years, but before they really got bad. And then he was there the James Harden years, the meat of the good years, when James Harden was probably the best guard in the NBA at that time. I remember he was the coach of that 65-win Rockets team that was supposed to have beaten the Warriors. If that was Phil Jackson coaching, they would not have lost that series against the Warriors. So when you look at it, Rick Adelman went to 2 NBA finals with the Portland Trail Blazers. And altogether, he coached in 4 conference finals. D'Antoni never reached the NBA finals. And he went to the conference finals 2 times. Should have been more than twice. Of course, Mike D'Antoni is the coach that coached the 7 seconds or less offense with the Phoenix Suns. They were a very entertaining team to watch during the regular season. But, you know, the thing about D'Antoni teams is that they can be fun to watch. But Mike D'Antoni was not a coach that could adapt to the roster. He had a certain philosophy, and that's how he coached. Whereas Rick Adelman was more of a team-oriented style coach. He was a player's coach. He was more personable, from what I could tell. He was more beloved by the players than Mike D'Antoni. I don't know if Mike D'Antoni was hated. He definitely wasn't George Karl. But from what I could tell, Rick Adelman was really well liked by the players. And he coached what he had. When he had talent around him, or when I say he had talent on his teams, they did very well. But we have to remember, Rick Adelman never won a championship, but let's look at some of the teams that he faced in the finals. I mean, he went against the bad boy Pistons in 1990, right? Now, you could argue maybe they should have won more than one game, but they were playing very well in that finals, I remember correctly. Then he played arguably, I know we all look at the 96 Bulls as the best team, but some will point to the 92 Bulls as perhaps their best incarnation, because Michael and Scottie were both in their primes then. You could argue Jordan wasn't quite in his prime anymore in 96. Close to it, but not quite the same player. And Pippen started off the 95-96 season gangbusters, but the beginning of the decline of Scottie Pippen came, I would say, in December 95, January 96, after that back injury. And then the rest of the three-peat, he was deteriorating offensively. And then the 92 Bulls team, you know, they still had Craig Hodges. They still had Cliff Livingston. They had Bobby Hansen. Paxton still had a little bit more left in him. They had a young B.J. Armstrong. The bench was just better. You know what I mean? And they lost to that team. And then, of course, when he was coaching the Kings, they had to go up against the Spurs. They had to go up against a young Dirk and the Mavericks. They had to go up against, obviously, Kobe and Shaq's Lakers. Hell, if it wasn't for that shot Robert Horry made, then perhaps Rick Adelman may have won a championship. We don't know. Probably. But, ultimately, won a championship. But neither did D'Antoni. And I can't think of Rick Adelman coaching teams that choked as much as D'Antoni's teams have. The greatest choke job I've ever seen was the Houston Rockets in Game 7 against the Golden State Warriors at home, Game 7. I have never seen a team before or since come close to missing 27 three-pointers in a row. Now, technically, James Harden should have broke that streak, but the shot was waved off. But they missed 27 three-pointers in a row. At some point, don't you think you need to do something different? But that's the limitations of the D'Antoni philosophy. By the way, I think Mike D'Antoni has something like a 56% win percentage in the regular season. 53%. So he had a 53% win percentage and a 49% win percentage in the playoffs. So, I don't know, man. I think my general consensus is that Mike D'Antoni, when he had talent on his teams, which was usually most of the time, they did very well in the regular season. But in the playoffs, he always got exposed. Rick Adelman, when he did have talent on his teams, did very well, got the best out of his stars. I mean, because look, Vlade Divac's best years were not with the Lakers, but with the Sacramento Kings. Chris Webber's best years were with the Kings. Clyde Drexler's best years was when he was coached under Rick Adelman in the late 80s, early 90s. He was the MVP candidate in 92. You could argue Kevin Duckworth's best years when he got into the best shape of his career was when he was coached under Rick Adelman. There's a trend there. When you look at his career, Kevin Martin, his best years were when he was coached under, matter of fact, it was 3 times in his career, he was coached under Rick Adelman. So to me, Mike D'Antoni might be more decorated and more celebrated by the media, but Rick Adelman, I believe, was the better coach. He had more success, more sustained success when he had talent, and he went to an NBA Finals, which is something that D'Antoni never was able to do. And unfortunately for D'Antoni, he came across, the likes of, Isaiah Thomas, Michael Jordan. And, look, and then I'll give you another reason why D'Antoni's overrated. In 2010, the Suns, went to the conference finals. D'Antoni was not the head coach then. He was in New York. And with that talent, that team, someone else, I forgot who the coach was, but someone else coached that team to the conference finals. Unfortunately, they ran into 2010 Lakers. And we all know when Mike D'Antoni went to the Lakers, he tried to think that he was going to play that same 7 seconds or less style with the Lakers, but he didn't have the roster to do that with. They brought Steve Nash over. He was trying to replicate what he did in Phoenix and LA. It didn't work. And you could argue that maybe that the way they played contributed to Kobe's injury. I don't know. But anyway, Just want to put that out there. Tell me what you guys